Yeah. So yeah, for those of you who haven't met me, I'm Anton. I work on ad blocking at Brave. And yeah, I've titled my talk Content Blocking Collaboration in a Manifest v3 World. So if you're not aware of Brave, we basically have a browser. There's ad blocking built in and on by default. The browser is based on Chromium. And we actually don't rely on Manifest v2 or v3 at all because we patch directly into the source code for the ad blocking. So you might be wondering, why is this guy giving a talk about Manifest v3? The answer is filter lists. Ever since the beginning, we've basically used the same filter lists that extension-based ad blockers have been using, and that's been great for us because we don't have to have a separate set of filter lists that we're maintaining. And it's also been great. We've been able to upstream changes back to the community and collaborate a lot on that front. But of course, Manifest v3, the big change is declarative net request. We have this completely different JSON-based syntax. There's a limit to how many rules you can have. Andre has actually talked a lot about this, so I won't go too much into detail here. But again, yeah, there's the question of, will we still be able to use the same filter lists? What's going to happen to the filter list going forward? So that's basically what I want to focus on. And I think to answer that, it's important to look at basically what the upcoming ad blocking landscape is going to look like. In particular, if you have a Manifest v2 extension today, what kind of options do you have going forward? So obviously, first option, rebuild for Manifest v3. And yeah, we've seen that happening. Of course, the AdGuard Manifest v3 extension, the uBlock Origin minus or light as it's called now, I believe. Yeah, it's happening. And what we've seen is that these extensions, they do work. They're able to block ads. Of course, there are some limitations as we've seen, but they are generally working. But maybe, I think there might be some potential concerns, especially if you look forward into the future as to what might be happening with Manifest v3. In particular, I mean, there is a page of known issues when migrating to Manifest v3 that Google has published. And I mean, there are kind of a lot of them, actually. And of course, being software, there's probably some unknown ones, too. So that's something to consider, right? You're basically building your entire platform, again, on a new platform, which is still a work in progress, and you have a deadline. So all I can say is if you're doing this route, lots of respect to you, because that sounds very stressful. And another thing to consider, right, the web keeps evolving. We've seen Google even having proposals like signed exchanges where network requests could be authenticated by a different domain than they're actually served by. And so that potentially causes some issues with how we do ad blocking today. You can have a domain-specific rule, but when you have two different domains responsible for bringing that rule to that network request to you, how are you going to signal that out for blocking? And web bundles is another example. Basically taking a whole bunch of requests for a single website and putting them into a single network request such that that's served as a single unit. Ad blocking, again, isn't necessarily ready to handle this because these are now not separate network requests. You can't single them out with separate rules. So you might need a new syntax or something to describe this. And I think there's a big question of, like, if these APIs become a reality, how is Manifest v3 going to be updated in correspondence to address them? And I mean, you have to consider maybe they will be addressed, but maybe it won't be prioritized. Or maybe you're even going to have to learn C++ yourself as an extension developer just to get these features in that you require. And who knows if your patches will even be accepted. Maybe it's going to be very difficult to get past code review. I mean, I can't answer these questions, but they are certainly unknowns. And I think there's a lot of questions still with Manifest v3 going forwards. Which brings me to the next option. You can continue using Manifest v2, right? Of course, the big news is that Manifest v2 is going away. But I mean, Chrome isn't the only browser out there. Brave is actually committed to continuing to maintain Manifest v2 and web request so that extensions that we are already familiar with will continue to work in Brave. We actually continue using uBlock Origin for their logging a lot of times internally, just because they have really good logging, and we appreciate that a lot. And we know that AdBlock developers put on a lot of thought to the security and privacy and performance kind of concerns about their extensions. So we definitely want to recognize that as much as possible. But we're not alone here. Firefox, Vivaldi, and Opera have all committed to, at least some extent, to trying to support these older extensions, whether that means keeping Manifest v2 or just web request, so that there's still more options available there. There's still definitely a concern about market share, right? I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with a graph like this. Chrome has a very large market share compared to everyone else. But honestly, as an extension developer, you have opportunities here. You can actually put pop-up notifications in the browser. It's not unprecedented, right? Tell users that they have a chance of trying out a new browser which actually supports some of the features that they're interested in, and that could be an option, right? I'd be happy if you got users to switch to Brave, but there's plenty of options out there, and honestly, more client diversity is just a good thing for the web in general, I would say. And speaking of client diversity, third option is to build your own browser. And I know everyone thinks that's crazy, but I'd like to maybe convince you that maybe that's not so crazy after all, right? If you look at the existing browser landscape, there's actually a lot of browsers built on Chromium today. If you want to build a browser for iOS, you're basically limited to WebKit. And so every browser on iOS is based on WebKit. Tor has been building on Firefox for a pretty long time now. And there's actually even startups that are building on top of Brave, which is kind of interesting to see. But it is really becoming increasingly popular to take an open source rendering and execution engine and basically build your own patches on top of that to redefine the vision of what it means to be browsing the internet. And I think that rings true for Brave in particular. And we've been doing a pretty good job at this, I think. We've been documenting all of our processes publicly on our GitHub wiki, and we have a pretty nice set of directions here whenever we onboard new developers. They're looking at this wiki and figuring out how to patch Chromium, and I mean, as a result, we basically have less than 24 hours usually in between a Chromium release and the corresponding Brave release, so we kind of have this down to a science. And speaking from my own personal experience, since I kind of build ad blocking into the browser, I think it's a lot of fun, right? You actually don't need that many patches to have a good result. If you think about, for an ad blocker, right, you have basically, you need to make decisions in the network stack as to whether a request needs to continue or be stopped. And so that's a small patch. And then you need maybe to inject some CSS or JavaScript into a page. That's maybe another small patch. And all of a sudden, you have a complete freedom to use your own engine or any other code to put logic into those two places that are patched in C++. And personally, I've been building in Rust. Rust is awesome. It gives you a lot of security and performance, and it's just a joy to work in. So I think there's a lot of flexibility there too. Of course, if you're building your own browser, you have kind of the ultimate power move, right? Git revert. If you're not happy with something that upstream has done, you can always undo it. There's only a small maintenance cost going forward, but if you think about the size of a browser code base, it's actually not that big of a maintenance cost if you do your patches correctly, because the odds that a single part of the code will change significantly over time is not that high. And again, there's no more API limitations, right? I know a lot of people have been interested in seeing CNAME uncloaking on Chromium, and there's been these open issues about getting some kind of DNS API available in Manifest v2 and also in Manifest v3. These have been basically open since 2021, and I haven't seen any activity on these two particular issues since March 2022. So I'm not exactly sure what the status is there. I have seen that there was some interest in getting some kind of DNS abilities in Manifest v3 from this issue, but it wasn't on the known issue list. So again, I don't really know what's happening there. But I didn't really have to worry about this when I went ahead and supported CNAME uncloaking in Brave. I basically just made a single PR here, which was less than 200 lines, as you can see. And I didn't have to ask anyone permission. That's basically the code was mine to work with, and we've had seen uncloaking since then, so that's been pretty cool. And having your own browser is also a great kind of experimentation test bed as well. I'm technically under the research team, and we've put in a lot of protections for privacy that are kind of adjacent to ad blocking and give a similar second line of defense, we could say. So farbling, for example, is randomizing different results of web APIs so that it's much harder for fingerprinting scripts to produce a persistent identifier based on your browser hardware or setup. Ephemeral third-party storage is a great way to make sure that third-party embedded content is not able to track you between different websites. That's all completely separated. Sugarcoat is a nice pipeline we built on top of PageGraph, which is like complete in-browser tooling. And Sugarcoat is able to create privacy-preserving replacements for resources on the web that normally might be blocked, but would cause too much web compat breakage if they were just straight out blocked. And we've been posting about a whole lot of other privacy updates if you're interested. So yeah, that's kind of the upcoming landscape, roughly, of people who use filter lists. And obviously, if you're using option 2 or option 3, you're not going to have to really think about filter lists too much. You can continue using the ones that you've always been using. And I can say for Brave, definitely we'll be continuing to use EasyList, Easy Privacy, and all the other great filter lists out there and maintaining them as much as we have to. But for option 1, yeah, you're now going to have to think about what kind of filter lists are we using, where are we going to be getting those from. And I definitely want to stress that the worst possible thing that could be an outcome of Manifest v3 is if we kind of split the whole ecosystem into 2 different camps here. So basically, the community is all working together on solving this issue of making the web a better place right now. And if that's in 2 different parties, then all of a sudden we have to work twice as hard in each respective camp, and that's not good for anyone, pretty much. So I think it's important to consider how can we prepare for this upcoming landscape. And as Andre has mentioned before, I think list conversion tools are a great idea. That way we can continue using the same filter lists as a single source of truth and derive whatever capabilities we need from those. And this is not new at all. This syntax here looks a lot like what I showed you earlier from declarative net request, but it's actually the iOS content blocking syntax. That's a screenshot directly from Apple's documentation. And yeah, it's JSON-based. There's a limit to how many rules you can load. And again, there's not necessarily one-to-one feature mappings between the 2 syntaxes, but this is totally something you can convert from. I personally built out a conversion tool in AdBlock Rust, which can do this exact thing. I know AdGuard has their own too. And another thing that we need to keep in mind is the size of those lists. And for that, we actually built out a thing called SlimList, which is a pipeline that crawls the most popular sites on the internet and is able to take the most important filter lists rules and basically consolidated just the ones that are most effective by measuring how often those rules are triggered on the web. And so that allows us to really make the most of the rule limit on iOS without sacrificing too much privacy for users. Another thing we can do is just to keep lists clean, right? Because keeping lists clean is great for even existing ad blockers. The fewer rules you have in your lists, the better memory performance you'll have at runtime, and fewer downloads and bandwidth concerns for users who are downloading these lists. But especially going forwards, if we're going to have Chrome and iOS both limiting the number of rules you can load at runtime, that's going to be very important to have small lists as much as possible. So we've actually been sponsoring Ryan Brown, our fanboy, his work on EasyList as a maintainer. And that's been awesome. Especially recently, he's been focusing on making sure that we've been removing a lot of generic cosmetic rules. And I wanted to showcase some of his work here. So yeah, a while ago, you had a lot of more handmade sites, a lot of custom-built scripts, and people would be dumping, say, images named adbanner.png into their public HTML directory, and that was that, just for themselves to keep it organized, really. So we would have a lot of rules targeting kind of generic resource names that we would expect to see as a content that we wouldn't like. These days you see a lot of third-party platforms for ad serving or user tracking or things like that. And that actually makes it a lot easier for filterless maintainers. Once you find and identify something that isn't good on a website, chances are it's shared by a bunch of other websites too as a third-party resource. So that allows us to have a much more compact kind of list and be much more efficient there. So what Ryan's been doing is going ahead and removing a bunch of cosmetic rules. So, for example, somebody probably had a rule, had an element on their page at one point called "more ads," and that's probably not relevant anymore. So this and a bunch of others have been deleted over the last few months. And if we look at the size of that general hide list in EasyList, this is about 2/3 of what it was at the maximum, and this is bringing it back down to like 2016, 2017 levels, which is awesome to see. We also have a similar thing for network blocking. So at some point, probably someone had an ads folder in their UI directory because they're showing things that are in the UI of the website, and maybe that's not relevant anymore, or maybe we can narrow that down to a few specific websites that are using a similar scheme. So that makes it a lot easier. And again, for the network blocking list, this is almost half of what it was at the highest amount, and that's bringing us back to like 2013 levels of size. So that's great to see. Huge shout out to Ryan, who's here today. And finally, I think the most important thing we can do is just continue to be sharing efforts as much as possible. So, I mean, Brave has been built on the shoulders of giants, really, in the ad blocking community. A lot of this wouldn't have been possible without so much open work on filter lists and the extensions themselves. Basically, everything Brave has been doing has been open source. The browser itself, all of the patches, the ad blocking engine, the ad blocking infrastructure on our server side, that's all open source, and we've been publishing it freely as much as possible. We've been publishing our research on privacy and ad blocking and other related topics so that everyone else in the community can benefit from those as well. And I think really going forward, communication is going to be super important because we're going to have different platforms with different capabilities, and it's going to be more important than ever that AdBlock developers and filterless maintainers are talking to each other and sharing what's not working, what is working, and making sure that we can make our lists as effective as possible for everyone. And yeah, I think it's really important to keep in mind that we all ultimately have the same goal. I know a lot of AdBlock extensions and platforms maybe have slightly different priorities. Some of them want to block as much as possible. Some of them want to preserve more of the publisher content. Some of them focus on giving users as many tools to tweak the experience as much as possible, and some of them are really focusing on a nice out-of-the-box experience where you don't have to tweak anything. But ultimately, we all want to make the web better for users, and so I think we should focus on building the technology that enables that, because ultimately we all want to build a better user-respecting user agent. So I'm looking forward to seeing that with all of you, and thanks.
Hello, me again. Thank you, Anton. This was really interesting. Again, we have a little bit of time for questions. Just in case, me and my colleague Susanne would like to, maybe in a flight attendant style, quickly remind you of how this mic works, ideally for our remote audience to be perfectly hearable. You take it uncomfortably close to you, and you will look super funny when people look at you, like this. And then people can hear you just fine. So this is how this thing works, just as a gentle reminder. So who's got a question for Anton? OK, I will make an attempt here. Woo!
Hi. My question is about Brave's claim that you would like to keep Manifest v2 alive and to continue to support it. It seems to me that extensions is not just about supporting them by the browser, but it's also about distributing these extensions. And the problem is that at some point, Chrome Web Store doesn't allow Manifest v2 extensions anymore, and we do not have any alternative place to actually distribute these extensions. If you make the users download a CRX file from somewhere on the web, it is at least not very convenient, at least. There are more problems about that. So what do you think?
Yeah, so we actually are in internal discussions right now about building out a web store replacement where users will continue to be able to get Manifest v2 extensions going forwards. We don't have anything to publish on that at the moment, but that's certainly something we're working on internally.
Yes.
And I'll mention too, if you have any feedback on what you'd like to see on that kind of platform, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to talk about that.
Okay, so a different facet of this problem is that the extension developers, if Chrome has 70% or 75 or whatever market share, they're incentivized to write MV3 extensions. And if they only would maintain MV2 versions for Brave and Brave's App Store or extension store, it's not, it's not a huge audience for them. So I think it still might die a natural death in the sense that why would you spend effort on maintaining an MV2 extension just for Brave, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a reasonable concern, and that's why there are multiple options, of course. It's not the only option to stay on Manifest v2. You can certainly do whatever you'd like. And I know, for example, I've been looking a little bit at the uBlock Origin extension for Manifest v3. They're actually building it straight in the same code base as the original uBlock Origin extension. So there is potentially some capability of maintaining multiple in the same code base and not having to kind of do that much duplicated effort. But again, there are differences, and ultimately it's up to the extension developers what kind of route they want to take there.
Hi, thanks for your talk. It was great. Have you published any tools that help with converting lists?
Yeah, so we have the iOS conversion tool, which converts to the iOS content blocking syntax. We haven't actually done anything in terms of Manifest v3 formats, but I would be happy to add that into AdBlock Rust if that's something somebody's interested in contributing, or I think that's just a thing that people should be focusing on in general now that Manifest v3 is coming out.
Yeah, I think talking about Andre's point earlier about consolidating things, having a kind of some place where you can easily convert the filter list rules would be useful. So
yeah,
it's the kind of thing that Brave could do really well.
Yeah. And again, I think the best place for this is actually in the extension itself, if possible. But who knows? Maybe that's not a practical thing to do.
I was thinking, because there's tons of ways for ad filtering that aren't inside a browser as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of them use the ABP format. So having a central place to be able to kind of dick around with the formats would be useful, I think.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So one cool thing actually about building an AdBlock engine in Rust is we can compile it to WASM and run it in a browser too. So
okay. Yeah, cool.
I've actually built kind of a prototype dashboard where you can kind of tweak filters and things like that. I think that would be fun, yeah.
Alrighty, there's a question over there, but I think, Smart already got the box.
Yeah. Thank you for your talk. Are there other Chromium-based browsers which have the intention of supporting, like keeping support for MV2 and for like APIs like web request? And is there like an opportunity to work together to keep that support? So
I've definitely seen some talk about Vivaldi and Opera trying to support Manifest v2 or web request going forwards. I can't speak for them, obviously, but based on what I've seen online, there is certain discussion about that.
Okay. Any further questions from the audience? Oh, there's one.
Do you have any concerns that at some point you physically won't be able to maintain Manifest v2 anymore?
I mean, it's certainly, there is going to be an ongoing maintenance cost, and I think Brave is committed to working with that as much as possible. I think the main decision of whether or not to continue with Manifest v2 will come based on the extension ecosystem. So if it turns out that most people have decided that Manifest v2 isn't useful anymore, then maybe that's time to let go of it. But I think in the meantime, we're at least still getting a lot of use cases out of Manifest v2 in terms of filter debugging and things like that. So no reason to get rid of it, really.
I think we have time for one last question. Somebody wants to take the opportunity?
Or maybe I'm going to go again. So you mentioned also web bundles and signed exchange, I think, and in conjunction with MV3, all of these are throwing a wrench in the ad blocking space. And I wonder what's your feeling? Does it seem like these are all like legit improvements to the web overall? Or are they like Google's attempt to destroy ad blocking?
Well, I don't want to make any claims like that. They certainly have some technical merits, but I know my boss, Pete Snyder, he works a lot in the privacy space and does the kind of committees and things like that. So I think he's taken a public stance on them not being great for the web in general. I would generally agree with him. I think he's a smart guy. So.
All right. Then thanks so much, Anton.
Thank you.
And yeah, please give him a hand here.